We're glad that you're all here. I'm very excited about today because I think we have a great presentation. Let me start by introducing the firm, and then I will do a very quick intro of our speakers, two of our amazing CFOs, and then we will get started. My name is Gershon Margolis. I am the founder of Imperial Advisory. We are a team of, we're a fractional CFO firm. We do fractional CFO work as well as other finance consulting. So in a large organization, the CFO is often one of the CEO's most trusted advisors. And for companies not quite at the size where they need a full-time CFO, using a fractional CFO gives them the same sort of strategic guidance and advantage for as much time a week or a month as they need. By bringing an experienced CFO onto your team, you get to stop worrying about strategic financial decisions and spend more time focusing on your actual business, which ultimately boosts sales and profits. We pick up where bookkeeping and accounting leaves off, and sometimes we'll serve as a second set of hands for an existing CFO. We end up getting involved in all sorts of things. We work on M&A as well as the day-to-day work, and we've got people with a range of backgrounds. All of our CFOs have been CFOs, but some of them have been CEOs or COOs, as well. All of our CFOs have over 30 years of experience. And we also have someone who I think is here today. We have a whole bunch of people from the team here. Welcome, everyone. And one of the people who I'll just highlight is our FP&A person. So we do all sorts of financial planning and analysis, even on businesses where they don't formally need a CFO, but they still need help on that side. That's Ken, who I think is here today. Again, welcome everyone. We're glad to have you. Today we have two great speakers. They both have decades of experience, Barry and Andrew. And they've both been, actually they both started in public accounting. They've both been CFOs. At least one of them was in the military, but possibly both. And we're glad to have them here to help us understand how to cope with inflation. Thank you both for joining us. We're going to start with them kind of sharing some initial thoughts, and then we'll move into some prepared Q&A and then open up the floor to all of our guests. If you do have questions, definitely in the middle during the Q&A part, jump in. I think in the beginning they're going to talk for a few minutes each. So go ahead. Barry, want to start?
I'll start. I'll be happy to start. Or Andrew, if you want to go ahead, go ahead. I don't care.
I insist that you go first, Barry.
Okay. Let's first of all try and define what inflation is. And inflation is a decline in the purchasing power of your local currency. In our case, our local currency is also a worldwide reserve currency, the US dollar. So what happens in the US tends to affect prices all around the world. The measure of inflation is done by, I guess, the Bureau of whatever it is in the US government, Bureau of Commerce. And I think they said that the latest year-over-year measure was 9.1%. But that's misleading because some of the elements in the index increased by far more than 9.1%, as we all know as we go to the gas station and try to fill our cars. And some things are probably have stayed the same or even gone down. So when talking in terms of strategy of how to deal with inflation, you have to deal with the environment that your company exists in. How are you going to deal with it? How can you mitigate inflation to the best of your ability? And I think that Andrew and I have some ideas on how to do that. And I will turn it over to Andrew to do his introduction. Andrew, it's all yours.
Sure. Thanks very much, Barry. Yeah, what Barry said is correct. I think we can define inflation in simple terms. There's three ways we can get it. One is that market events can cause a scarcity of goods, and that'll give us price inflation. Another is printing fiat currency without increased production will give us currency inflation. And the third way is we could have both of those things, which is what we have now. And just for clarification, I'm using fiat money as a term, meaning currency that's issued by a government and it's not backed by tangible assets. Barry indicated that there's a way that that's being measured right now. And when prices are affected by inflation, and you can have inflation without prices being affected, I'll speak to that in a minute. But when that happens, people actually feel it. And that's why price inflation is usually used as a standard for the measurement of how much inflation we have. You could have an increase in an inflated money supply. We've had it for the past 20 odd years without prices going crazy. It all depends on where the money goes and how it's used. In the past 20 years before we came across this pandemic and supply chain problems and scarcity of goods, the money was basically going into the stock market. That would be easy to see. If you looked at the stock market, prices were crazy. The feds were keeping interest rates artificially low, which also added to investing more in the stock market than maybe otherwise would be prudent based on discounted cash flows and so on with low interest rates. So you can have currency inflating without prices going up. But right now we have both. And it's a tough thing to deal with. Okay, so
now when I start asking questions?
yeah, that's right. I think that's what you do, yeah.
All right. So we labeled this webinar "How to Cope with Inflation." So why don't we start with what can businesses do to mitigate inflation? What can businesses do to protect themselves? And does that differ depending on the type of business?
Sure. You want me to go first this time, Barry?
Go ahead.
Sure.
Okay. So in the first place, it really doesn't matter who the business is selling to in respect to the degree in which inflation might affect them. What's more significant, I think, is their product or services price elasticity, which would mean whether or not they can adjust their pricing without losing competition and still be competitive. The degree of influence they might have in the industry to contract favorably for cost of goods and for cost of services. The industry itself, what kind of an industry it is. You know, the firm I worked at as a CFO for 29 years sold cigarettes, cigars, tobacco, and everything that goes into a convenience store. And the worse things got in the world, the more people smoked and ate cupcakes. So it's kind of recession-proof, that industry. And so it does matter also what kind of business you're running. You may suffer more than anyone else. I don't know how far you want me to go with this, but I can keep going. But go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to ask a follow-up question.
Sure.
So when you worked in that business,
Yeah.
a large part of, and maybe if we end up covering some of our later questions now, that's okay. But when you worked in that business, did you were able to mark up your prices based on if prices went up? So if there was inflation, you were charging just on top of whatever cost was.
That's
You
right.
weren't, besides for the fact that people bought more, which is in general a good thing, you also weren't really exposed to, exposed to rising costs.
Yeah, in the consumer goods that we sold, price increases could be passed along from the manufacturers to the distributors to the retailers and eventually to the customers.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so that's something that in theory a business can strive for. If you can figure out how to charge cost plus,
Sure.
which sometimes we view negatively, but cost plus would protect the business from inflation.
Yeah, I would say anytime that you can do that, you do it. But obviously, and Barry can speak to this, he's got experience, there are industries where that can't be done.
I mean, as a matter of fact, it's very rare. You were one of the lucky players because of the nature of your product. At the last time we had horrible inflation, I was in a consumer durable goods company, and it was a very competitive industry. And you really couldn't increase your prices. Quite the contrary, because it was also at the same time a terrible recession in the late 70s. A lot of my competitors were lowering their prices. So the issue is, what can you do to mitigate prices? There wasn't a heck of a lot we could do. The other side of the coin is that if prices are going up and goods are going up, debt is at the same time the value or the cost of debt generally goes down. So people who are debtors are winners, creditors are losers. So one of the things you can do is if you have debt that's available at a fixed price, take some of it down. You'll pay it back with cheaper dollars. But that requires betting on the come that inflation is going to be a continuing process. I think where we are right now, the government is saying it's temporary. We hope it is. So I don't think you want to make long-term decisions based upon short-term events. And that creates the dilemma for everybody, no matter what industry you're in. I think where it comes down to, where I see it, is that there are no good decisions. There are better decisions and worse decisions. And inflation is really the hidden tax that affects all of us, and it depends on the business that we're in, and we can get into some detail there. Andrew, you have comments?
I also want to add that we just talked about whether you can adjust pricing and so on. If you can't sit around and be helpless either. If you don't have flexibility in your gross margins or in the cost of goods and services, then what you have to do, you have to increase efficiency, and you have to do it quickly. Whether you do that through technology or changing your processes, there's no other way to go. If you want to keep a bottom line without being able to change your pricing and your margins, then you have to act like a real entrepreneur and start finding a better way to get a profit.
I'd like to add to that a little bit, to add to what Andrew just said. I mean, there are things you can do. Let's say that you're in a product business and you have some major suppliers. What I did in these kinds of circumstances was place an open blanket purchase order for the next 12 months. I was able to figure out in dollars what I was going to buy, even if I didn't know the products. And I made a deposit on future purchases to fix my prices. So I was able to really control my purchase prices. If you're in a service business, that's a lot more difficult because the major expense you have are wages. And generally in an inflationary time, there's a lot of pressure on wages to increase because your workers are hurting. And I luckily have never been in a service business where I've had to deal with that. I found it much easier being in a product business. But Andrew, were you in any service businesses who had to deal with pressure on wages?
Well, we did have a union, and that's the only place that pressure came on wages. But otherwise, no.
Wanted to, can I jump in, Gershon?
Of course. Sure.
So my question is around, actually, you brought up wages. And so the last, I don't know, I'm not an economist, but the last, and especially all my C's in econ over undergrad and graduate school proved that. But it doesn't seem like there was any wage growth for a period of about 10 years.
That's correct.
And now we have rampant inflation and we also have wage growth, which is interesting. So what's the spread between wage growth and inflation, and what's the sort of psychic benefit or detriment to the difference between those two things?
Are you sure there's wage growth?
There is currently wage growth. It's not as robust as the inflation rate, but there is wage growth, yes.
So too late now. We could have done a poll. Businesses on here. See what everyone is seeing. So that would have been a good poll for us to do, to ask everyone if they're seeing wage growth.
I'm not sure the statistics are showing that very much, but maybe you'd expect it.
It is happening. And Simon, obviously it's a detriment if the wages don't keep up with it. But again, in business, what you have to be is competitive. If no one's keeping up with it, then you won't lose your workforce, and you won't have to extend yourself to maintain key personnel. So if it's spread out, it's not as bad for the business as it is for the individual.
Yeah, so I guess I'm struggling with the arithmetic. So the arithmetic says our population is not growing very fast. We have unemployment at quote unquote full employment levels. and wage growth isn't growing as fast as inflation. How is that possible?
Well, we have a very particular circumstance here, I think, because the pandemic started that. We have a particular circumstance where there's a confluence of events. There's even more than what happened during the Great Recession that I was a part of in the 70s. You know, we have a real disruption in the supply chain. We have extraordinary amounts of stimulus sent out to people where there's a great many people would rather just take the dole than work. And we have a lot of regulations and restrictions on different industries that need to be freed up in order to stimulate and grow the economy. So there's a lot of reasons, I think, way beyond the printing of money of why we're in the situation we are. Listen, there's a way out of this. I think we'll get to that later. Maybe we will, or maybe we won't, as far as what the government can do, which is basically get the hell out of the way. But we're in a really bad spot, and without some real change in, let's say, the ethos of the government, in the way the government looks at how it's going to fix things, without some real change there, this is going to go on for a while.
I want to add one more thing to address Buddy's point, and then maybe we'll move on to the next thing. In terms of the arithmetic question, it's possible that even though we're experiencing inflation, it takes time for that to translate into wage growth. So, I mean, we definitely are seeing wage growth, but if Buddy's saying that it's not as bad as inflation, I mean, when annual salary increases come around, things are going to turn over. And so, you know, it could be every company's giving out 10% raises, but not every company is necessarily
think
giving
they
those out
are.
today.
I don't think they are.
But if they were, we still wouldn't see it yet, because not everyone would have done it yet.
The real issue is, if you look back at the 78, 79, 80, and the stagflation of that era, there was tremendous inflation. Interest rates were close to 20%, and yet wages were flat.
Really?
Yes, I mean, they didn't grow very much. I've been looking at some of the settlements that have been going on in the last few months, where unions have settled for like 5% increases over 3 years. That doesn't sound like there's a lot of wage pressure, which is very, very strange. And it really opens up a whole series of issues that the government has to tread very, very carefully to not make worse. We would expect we would certainly expect wages to go up, and for there to be wage pressure in every business. Employees are struggling to pay their bills. But that doesn't seem to be happening to a great extent. We'll have to wait for the data to come out. I hope it's going up, because then people will survive a little better. If it doesn't go up, then the purchasing power is going to go way down, and we could have a very serious recession.
Yeah, we're going to have a serious recession anyway. But I do think that the current numbers are somewhere between 5 and 6% wage growth in 2022.
And yet you measure that against the measured allegedly 9.1%.
Right. It's not enough.
And you have a terrible decline in purchasing power.
That's right.
People are struggling.
Yep.
But as Andrew pointed out, the government's giving out money.
No, it's not.
Especially-
It did. It gave out money.
That's right. It did. And
It gave out money. Be
that
careful.
money's out there.
There's still added things. People with children, for example,
Yes.
there's like, if you earn less than, I think, 200 grand, you're getting money from the government, like direct deposited, unless that's over. But
No, there is.
over.
It's still there.
It's not over.
um,
Listen, what goes around comes around.
Oh.
The horrible inflation we had in the 70s and 80s, which, by the way, was double-digit inflation for a number of years,
Yep.
folks, for anybody not old enough. It really, I mean, everybody will point to the oil embargo, and they'll point to the different elements that were going on, Nixon's price controls and removing ourselves from the gold standard. All of that happened in the 70s and the 80s. But just before that, the government started spending like drunken sailors, because they started the, what did Lyndon Johnson call it? The Great Society, or whatever it was. We started welfare like there was no tomorrow, Medicaid, Medicare. So spending had been increasing dramatically, deficit spending. just before the inflation hit in the late 70s. And, the same thing's happening now. When you print money and you don't have any production behind that printed money, you're going to get inflation. Like I said, it doesn't have to be price inflation. It doesn't have to be right away, but eventually it will be. It all depends on where the money goes. That determines whether or not it's going to affect your pricing, or it's going to affect the stock market, or it's going to affect the economy in some other way.
Right. All right, let's go for one or two more questions, then maybe we'll open it up to the crowd. How can businesses manage debt more effectively during inflation? Are heavily indebted businesses in a better position? Are they going to make out like bandits? Are they going to do well now?
Only if they can continue to sell their products or services like
service
any time
to debt.
else. Certainly as inflation and decline in the purchasing power of a currency, you're paying off debt with cheaper dollars. There's no question about it. But at the same time, you have struggling to keep your sales up and get your sales prices up while you're getting pressure on all your costs. So it's theoretically they should be better off. Not always they are. It's a struggle. There's no question. It's a struggle for everyone during a period of high inflation. Now, let's be very careful. We are in a period of inflation, but it's not anywhere near the hyperinflation that we've seen in some countries, like 500 or 600% in Ukraine right now, the thousands of percents that were in Venezuela. I mean, the message there was they couldn't afford to buy toilet paper. It was too expensive because it was imported. They couldn't afford to import. So theoretically, debtors win. It's a struggle to win. But if you have debt, you're better off borrowing it now at a fixed price or fixed interest rate than waiting to borrow it.
Yeah.
If you can lock in.
Go ahead, Gershon.
I was asking Barry, if you can lock in existing fixed rates or based on prior, right? If you lock in a fixed rate today, who knows what's going to happen in the future?
Well, if
right?
you have
Inflation may not continue, or are we saying inflation will continue? So whatever you get.
You have to look at the rate now. It requires certain, I don't want to use the word gambles, but that's basically what it is. You have to assess the risk of interest rates going up or going down. I know that when we went through this the last time in 1978, I started to build a home, and Citicorp quoted me a mortgage rate of 5%. When I closed on the home a year later, after it was built, interest rates were at 19%, and I closed at 9%. Now, had I not fixed my interest rate, would I have been better off or worse off a year later? I mean, clearly 9% was cheaper than 19%. I mean, eventually it came down to 7% and I refinanced. But that's the kind of things you're dealing with. You can imagine that the home building business died when it was at 19%. There was no construction going on. It basically stopped.
No more Toll Brothers.
So I think the way you look at that, Gershon, Barry, during inflation is you don't take on debt because there's inflation, but you take advantage of the fact that there is inflation. If you have capital improvements to make, if you have business expansion going on, if you have a way of buying products now that can hold their value until you sell them, anything that you can do to use dollars now as opposed to 6 months from now, theoretically, you're going to get more bang for your buck. So if that's the case, then go ahead and borrow. And even though you may not be able to get a fixed rate, a lot of businesses are going to get something tied to LIBOR or prime. And even though the rate will go up, if you have the money now and you can do things now, it's still going to cost you less dollars than in the future while we have this kind of inflation. So don't be afraid of that. Don't do it just because there's inflation, but understand you can leverage it.
That's like a pun. Right? Leverage that. Thank you. All right. Let's do one more. Let's talk about hedging. We mentioned that. Are there any hedging strategies that small businesses should be thinking about that would help minimize inflation? I think Barry had some stuff on this.
I mean, if you're a small business, it's pretty hard to put in a real financial hedge. But you can try to balance the pressures on your business, again, by buying forward. If you're in a relatively stable product business, like hardware or durable goods or whatever is not technically changing very quickly, I would negotiate with suppliers to see if I can hold my prices for a period of time. In the service business, there's not much hedging you can do. You can't really do financial hedges or what we call cash hedging in a small business. You just can't afford it. But you have to look at ways that you can minimize the forward effect on costs by buying forwards. But the only hedge I can think of.
Well, I agree. A small business doesn't have the same degree of influence, and they're more followers than leaders in any industry if they're small. But I do think that there's a couple of things that you could consider hedging that small businesses can do. For one thing, again, depending on what it is that you're selling, if you can stock up on inventory and hold it, and the cost of holding it doesn't eat too much into your margins, then by all means you do that. If you can increase your AR turn, you do that. If you can expand your days in accounts payable, you do that. And maybe more importantly, you always want to use best practices in a business during periods of storm and periods of fair weather. But if you can find ways to be more efficient through technology, maybe through layoffs, maybe through customer analysis, that is to say, make sure that your customers you're dealing with give you the right profits and so on, and don't take on customers that don't. I think these are all ways you can try to hedge your bets.
All right, so I got more questions, but why don't we see?
Well, we got more answers, so keep shooting them out there.
Let's see if we have, if anyone in the audience wants to ask a question. Anyone have anything you want to add, clarify, disagree with? If you want to disagree, that's great. We love a little bit of controversy on these. No questions. Should have planted them all.
I got a question. So, why is Mike laughing so much?
I said we should have planted them all.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's.
I understood what Andrew said around government spending and all that stuff, but right now we have a worldwide inflation problem. It's not just the United States; it's everybody. So I'm wondering, is there anything so I was in the import-export business for 3 years, and I bought parts from overseas and brought them into the States and sold them to companies all over. It's a worldwide problem. It's not just a domestic problem. Is there any specific advice you might have around dealing with worldwide issues that are not just ethnocentric to the States?
Do you mean from a business point of view or from the government's point of view? Because I got plenty of answers for the government.
No, I'm not interested in the government. I'm interested in what businesses could do, and I think that's what our goal is today.
Yeah, there's only businesses unfortunately are in a position where they have to react. So they can't say, hey, listen, tariffs are a bad idea, stop them. They can't say you got to deregulate this and open up this. They can't do that. They just have to play by the rules. So businesses have it tough. I'm going to say this again because I think it's the truth. Whether you're in fair weather or foul, when you're running a business, you want to run it successfully for a long period of time. You got to use best practices, whatever the situation calls for at the time. I don't think there's any one particular cure. Where you can increase your margins, you got to figure out ways to do that. Where you can cut expenses, you got to figure out ways to do that. Where you can open up your markets to new customers, you got to figure out ways to do that. Either you do that or you die. But that's true in fair weather and foul.
I want to add something that I just thought of while Andrew was speaking. When I was in school, in graduate school, we had a professor who was a marketing professor, and he told us about a peculiar inflation situation that they had and how they dealt with it. He was working at Nestle at the time, and he's like, chocolate prices for like cocoa beans shot through the roof. He's like, went up by double or triple or 10 times, whatever it was. It was outrageous. He said they had built all their branding on being pure chocolate. So Hershey was at the time, what I think it was Hershey's, but one of the other major brands was artificial chocolate. Well, they didn't use real chocolate. Nestle had built their whole brand around, it's pure, real chocolate. You're not getting anything else. And the question was, what did they do? They couldn't raise their prices by a lot, maybe a drop, but not enough. They couldn't change, and they couldn't switch to that other product. So like, what did they do? If anyone wants to take a guess, that's fine. Otherwise, I will share what I thought was a pretty cool solution.
They made smaller candy bars.
That's an idea. People do that type of stuff. I've seen that, I think, with paper towel rolls, and
You see it in cereal. You see it in cereal. The boxes are the same. The content is less.
right. So that's an idea. I don't remember if we brought that up as a solution. This was a professor, by the way. His whole semester was Harvard Business School case studies. That was the entire semester. Every week or 2 weeks was another case study. So anyway, what they did there was they invented peanut butter chips, which apparently were much, much, much cheaper than chocolate chips. They had peanut butter chips and other types of things, and they sold them. They lost money on all the chocolate, but they kept their branding, and they were able to ride out the storm by basically creating a new similar product, which on its own, if they had just come up with peanut butter chips, might have priced it like peanut butter, which again, apparently was much cheaper. But instead they did this, and they were able to make a fortune on the peanut butter chips, and it made up for what they lost. But the idea to take from there is that there's all sorts of things that you can do. Sometimes you may not be able to attack inflation directly, but if you can change your product mix, change how you do things,
So substitute.
substitute. There are lots of other potential solutions, even if you can't directly attack the inflation.
Remember,
Question?
a big part of our inflation that we're seeing today is really in fossil fuels and natural gas and oil and gasoline. And that's being caused to a tremendous extent by the war in Ukraine. You have one of the largest fossil fuel exporters, Russia, under sanctions, and it's caused prices to go insane. And that's getting calculated into every country's inflation rate. Now, the government is sort of claiming that inflation rates will go down. I mean, that may be true if the war in Ukraine is over and if they remove the sanctions from Russia. If they don't, we're in a new reality, and we have to learn how to deal with it. And I'm not sure that everybody is prepared for that yet.
So Barry, I've been under the impression for the last few years that the United States is energy independent, meaning we don't have to import any.
It was.
Well, it can be.
Is that what you're saying?
It can be independent.
Well, it was. I don't think it is anymore.
I ask people to stay out of politics for this.
Yeah, well, let's talk politics. No, let's not do that.
Let's not talk politics. I'm not.
We can't. No.
So let's say that we're energy independent. Are the overseas oil companies or the international oil companies using the worldwide price of whatever Texas Intermediate crude to change the retail price in the U.S. for no reason? Just interested.
You're talking about what has been defined as the most corrupt business in the world.
Yeah, I know.
The oil companies will choose whatever price works for them. It has gone through all kinds of iterations. You have Brent crude from the North Sea. You have West Texas Intermediate. There's all kinds of market prices that are bid. The moment you have a hint of a shortage anywhere, those prices, futures, go skyrocketing. And that finds its way into our gasoline pumps. The other side of it is that what have we done with refineries? A lot of our government regulation have made some refineries just cost inefficient from a pollution point of view. So the refining capacity goes down, the demand goes up, prices go up. It's just a pure supply and demand business with the intermediary of the big oil companies who are the same players in the United States as around the world. It's a tough call, I think that the war in Ukraine has certainly caused the perception of tremendous shortages. Whether there are or not, I don't know. I'm not in the oil business, but it certainly has caused the prices to go up, but not as high as the gasoline prices are. I think the cost for West Texas crude, or maybe it's Brent crude, is $110. We've seen prices at $140 a barrel, and our gasoline wasn't $6. So there's something else going on in the marketplace.
Well, for one thing, you can't really go by the pump dollars, because many gas stations make their money off their convenience.
No, but look at the gas. The gas is $6.
No, I understand.
When you had a barrel of oil being much more expensive than it is now,
Sure.
and the gasoline wasn't $6
Just let me
a
explain,
barrel.
at the retail level, there are gas stations that use gas as a loss leader to bring people into.
No, but it's the other way. You got it wrong. They're
What do you
pricing
mean?
it way up. They're pricing it at $6. They're not pricing it at $4. If they
Maybe they
weren't,
used
then I'd
to
call
use
it
it
a
as a
loss
loss.
leader.
Maybe they used to use it as a loss leader, and
But they're
now
not.
they've shifted their model.
I haven't seen that. Look, we sold to gas stations. I've been selling to them for 29 years, like I said.
But you're not selling oil.
No. But we know what they're doing at the gas stations. We know how they make their money.
I don't think the gas stations are establishing the price. I think the suppliers are establishing the price. What I'm getting at is there's something else going in the market,
Yeah.
because we've seen the world price of oil much higher than it is now, and yet the price at the pump was much lower. So something else is going on.
I want to address that without getting political. I hope I can. I don't think gas companies are evil, and I don't think they do anything that other companies don't do.
Read the history.
I'm a pretty good student of history, as a matter of fact.
Well,
I think that they do. I think that they do things based on what's best for their company to make profits. Right now, they could increase the supply, but why would they do that when they know that the government is telling them they want less gas? They can't.
I'm not sure that.
They can't make.
I don't agree with that.
Let me finish. They can't make big investments and extend themselves when they don't know what they're going to be allowed to do.
No.
There's so much regulation
Andrew,
and confusion in the industry.
Andrew, you're addressing the wrong thing.
Am I?
We've seen gasoline world prices at $140 and $150 a barrel not so long ago, and the gas prices weren't anywhere near $4, $5, $6. Now we have gas, a barrel of oil, I think at maximum it's 101 or 103. It's not anywhere near the high that it's been before, and yet gas prices are the highest they've ever been. Something else is getting into the marketplace. Is it just that they can do it, so they're doing it? It's a game? I mean, it's causing tremendous hardship all around the world, and yet the prices aren't what they'd been years ago. It's still low.
Yeah, I don't think. I don't think there's any conspiracy going on. I think people.
Well, I don't think it's a conspiracy.
I think people are just looking out for themselves and running their business as best they know how under very difficult circumstances.
All right. I'm logged in from another device.
I'm glad Miriam came back. Hi, Miriam.
All right. Shelby, can you put up the poll? It won't let me do it. It says I'm logged in from two places. I'm assuming you're the other Gershon. Anyway, anyone else have any questions for our team? For our speakers? Shelby?
Where is Shelby?
I think she was.
Oh, I'm here. I've
Hi.
launched the poll.
Oh, you have? Okay. Oh, it's just not showing up for me because I guess it still thinks I'm you or something. All right. Anyway. All right. So do we want any more questions? Everyone, if you're able to fill out that poll, that would be great. It would be very helpful. And let's do one more question, and then we will kind of wrap up and thank everyone again. M&A, what kind of impact do we think inflation is going to have on mergers and acquisitions, on companies looking to be acquired or companies looking to grow via acquisition? Do we think that the inflation is going to impact that, and how?
Yeah, I think it's bound to, not really inflation per se, but the side effects of inflation. I think the Fed is going to have to increase interest rates. Way back in the, when I was a pup, they went to 19-20%, the Fed rates, to try to get that inflation under control. I don't know if we're ever going to see that again, but they're going to have to do that. And high interest rates, and there's going to be a recession in productivity, and it'll definitely impact valuations and increase the degree of risk. So it's bound to have an effect. Now, it'll be harder to sell at what you might consider a desired price, but there may be opportunities to buy at a bargain. So I don't know that M&As will slow down considerably. I think they'll just be different. They'll be constructed differently, and they'll go at different prices.
And for people who charge based on the size of the deal, they should start charging fixed prices.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell
But
the
that's not
bankers.
going to work. That's not going to work. They, everybody's slick. They're going to value the business based on the formulas that they know.
Well, I mean the bankers. When I was in banking,
Go ahead.
we used to charge based on the size of the
Oh, you're
deal.
talking about your fee?
Well, not my fee. I'm not a banker anymore.
The bank's
But
fee. The
yeah.
bank's fee, yeah.
But investment bankers and the attorneys, the professionals that work on the deal team.
Now there's an evil industry. Just kidding. Just kidding.
All right, Barry, you have any thoughts on M&A or other ending?
I think the only thing that happens with what's going to happen if inflation continues is certainly the value of hard assets is going to increase. At the same time, the cost of money might decrease as inflation reduces the purchasing power of currency. What it's really going to create is a whole lot of instability in the market, where you can't really count on what's going to happen in the future. I'm trying to think back to what 79, 80 when it was terrible, and I think that the M&A business basically stopped until the early 80s when Mike Milken began to do those cheap buyouts with funny money. We could maybe see a return of that kind of stuff, but so far we haven't seen inflation at the rates that were horrendous, like 19-20%. We don't know how long it's going to continue. The government says not long. We'll see. The longer it continues, the higher it goes, the more effect it's going to have on the economy, and it's going to slow it down. It's not going to speed it up.
All right. So thank you, Shelby, for putting this all together, and we appreciate your help. And thank you to our amazing team. We'll say to the speakers who are here, Andrew and Barry, thank you both for putting on a great show. And to Buddy and Ken, thanks for joining. Thanks, Buddy, for all. Buddy is Simon, by the way. You can ask him when you meet him why his name is Buddy, but we call him Buddy.